Rodan, and all the other legendary beasts from the East. On Animal Icons, it came from Japan.
Astounding beyond belief, the mightiest monster of them all.
During the mid-1950s, the Japanese science fiction classic Godzilla gave audiences around the world a new symbol of big screen terror, a 160-foot fire-breathing behemoth who became the first in a series of memorable Japanese movie monsters. Audiences of the 1950s, caught up in post-war fears about the atomic bomb, were astounded by Godzilla's chilling story and unforgettable title character.
Godzilla, king of the monsters. Fantastic beyond comprehension.
The original Japanese version of Godzilla, released in 1954, was really born out of the horrors of the atomic bombs that were dropped on Japan. I think it was a way of the country to come to terms with this horrible legacy that they had to live with.
Since his debut, Godzilla and his creature co-stars have gone on to make a giant imprint on the entire world. Their fans include such top Hollywood directors as Steven Spielberg, Tim Burton, and John Carpenter, who considers the original Godzilla one of the most influential films he's ever seen.
I'll aspire to every kid that era who had a camera to make movies like it. I had a little puppet dinosaur like you see behind me on the shelf. I move it around, animated it. I built a monster. Yeah, very influential.
I remember as a kid, you know, it's part of your growing up in New York, you'd see it every Saturday morning on TV. It's an icon of horror that you just, you know, you gotta sort of love it.
Japanese movie monsters have also become giants of commercial advertising. Godzilla's likeness can be found on everything from t-shirts and calendars to action figures and video games. And fans like California-based collector Gene Carbajal have devoured every product on the market.
I know I've gotten carried away with buying so many Godzilla toys. I just can't help it. They look great. Every time I see something new, I just gotta have it.
Without a doubt, Godzilla has always stayed a step ahead of the Japanese monster pack when it comes to popularity. And over the years, audiences have watched his surprising transformation from city-crushing bad guy to a kid-friendly superhero who's become a symbol of strength in his native Japan.
Even if he's not, you know, wearing a cape and, you know, defending the US of A, or Japan in his case, he's really acting on behalf of the planet, and he's sort of this reluctant superhero type.
It's lasted so long with sequel after sequel, it's become generational. Some Godzilla fans are children of Godzilla fans.
Godzilla, Godzilla.
I think it's something that could be genetic.
Japanese monsters like Godzilla first began their evolution onto movie screens back in 1954, a time when Japan's film industry, like the nation itself, was rebuilding after the country's crushing defeat in World War II.
Toho Studios, the birthplace of Godzilla, is kind of like the Warner Brothers of Japan, and they were one of the major studios, and they were willing to try new and innovative things. One of the ways they did that was during World War II. They actually were heavy into the production of war films, using elaborate miniatures and elaborate special effects.
But after 1945, war movies were forbidden in Japan, and it was up to filmmakers like producer Tomoyuki Tanaka to take the nation's film industry in a new direction.
In 1954, a co-production fell through at the last minute. Tomo was flying back home from Indonesia, and as the story goes, he was looking down at the water, and he came up with this idea for a giant monster movie.
Tanaka took a cue from the response to a recent re-release of the motion picture classic King Kong and the current Hollywood hit, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms.
Yes, it could happen. For various authorities believe that buried somewhere under the polar ice cap, in a state of suspended animation, are the awesome creatures, the leviathans that roamed the earth at the dawn of time. A nuclear explosion could free one from his icy tomb.
Tomoyuki Tanaka decided to combine the concept of a beast on the loose with the realistic horror of the recent bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. During the Second World War, 2 atomic bombs had killed nearly 300,000 civilians, events that remained a vivid memory for the people of Japan.
Japan was the only nation up to that point which had experienced atomic bombing. So the people of Japan were very, very fearful of atomic radiation.
There was an incident in the news in Japan at the time that was very influential on Tanaka's idea. There was a fishing boat called the Lucky Dragon. They wandered a little too close to the Pacific Proving Grounds, the atomic testing zone at the Marshall Islands. On the morning of March 1 of '54, the biggest H-bomb test in the U.S. Nuclear program's history was conducted, and the fishing boat was irradiated, and all the crew members got sick. And when they came back to Japan, actually one of them died, and it became a huge international incident. Tanaka said, "Look what's going on. What if a giant monster were reawakened by these nuclear tests? What if that monster came ashore and attacked Tokyo? Let's make a film about it."
Toho executives were excited by the idea, and to direct the picture, they turned to Ishiro Honda, a former assistant director to legendary filmmaker Akira Kurosawa.
Ishiro Honda was the best choice because he had this documentary-like style which lent itself perfectly to the somber quality of the film. He had traveled through the wreckage of Hiroshima on his way back to Japan after the war ended, and he witnessed firsthand the destruction that the bomb had wrought.
To design the beast's reptilian features, art director Akira Watanabe combined magazine illustrations to create an imaginative blend of several real-life dinosaurs.
Godzilla is a carnivorous bipedal dinosaur. You know, it's based on a theropod, which is the term we would use for that kind of an organism, like T-Rex or Allosaurus. The only thing really, really weird about it is it has the spikes along the back of the body. Now we know that most of the animals that have spikes were in fact herbivorous dinosaurs, not carnivores. So there's some poetic liberty being taken there, you know, about putting the spikes on it.
His fins glowed and he breathed fire, which was really cool. So immediately he was sort of like a mythical creature, like a fire-breathing dragon.
But the filmmakers still needed to come up with a fitting name for this angry green giant from the sea.
The Japanese word was Gojira, which is a combination of their word for gorilla and whale, which is Kujira. So this was Godzilla. It was a concept of this gorilla whale. Of course, it doesn't look like a gorilla or a whale. It's a dinosaur.
With his crew in place, producer Tomoyuki Tanaka was ready to begin filming on a story that was destined to become bigger than any of them ever imagined. When Animal Icons returns, Godzilla suits up to make his mark in movie history.
Seconds are about heart. Lance Armstrong's heart. I mean, wearing the yellow jersey or not. I'm Sheryl Crow, and this is Chasing Numbers.
The greatest challenge facing producer Tomoyuki Tanaka and special effects director Eiji Tsuburaya was to find a way to animate their new creation. Originally, they planned to give their massive monster life using the stop-motion technique used by Willis O'Brien in Hollywood films like King Kong. Instead, they ultimately chose a simpler approach, an actor in a rubber lizard suit.
One of the things that Godzilla slammers often criticize these films for is the rubber suit. And they incorrectly assume that Eiji Tsuburaya, the special effects director, was either ignorant or incapable of stop motion. In fact, he loved King Kong. I'm sure in a perfect world that would have been his first choice, but he had neither the time nor the money to do it that way. So they came up with this ingenious way of recreating massive destruction, which was to create a rubber suit, a latex costume in which an actor could get inside and basically destroy Tokyo by hand and foot and tail.
I knew that Godzilla was basically a guy in a suit. I could sort of see when stuff was fake, but it doesn't matter to me. That's one of the charms of those early films.
Everybody loves Godzilla's roar. The roar was actually created with musical instruments. They took a string bass and they took a coarse leather glove and rubbed it over the strings in a certain way and recorded that and then manipulated the speed, you know, sped it up or slowed it down until they got just what they wanted.
When Gojira premiered in the autumn of 1954, Tomoyuki Tanaka's giant creature and the movie's strikingly serious tone made an indelible impression on Japanese audiences.
The mood of the original Godzilla is unlike any movie I've ever seen, especially any horror film, or monster movie, or science fiction movie. It's so serious. That movie makes you feel like the science has unleashed something that is destroying us. And it makes you really feel sad and doomed.
The original Godzilla's effects are used sparingly, and that's to its benefit. A lot of the shots of Godzilla are kind of low angle or looking up at Godzilla or from a distance, and the film is shot in black and white and almost like a film noir kind of look to it. So that kind of masks some of the phoniness of him.
This new monster wasn't just reanimated by nuclear weapons. Gojira also stood as a metaphor for the atomic bomb itself.
It really is a story. The original film is a story of what it's like to live in a country that's been bombed by the atomic bomb. And that's what Godzilla is a stand-in for in the first movie. He's the A-bomb.
Gojira's mighty impact was about to hit other countries outside Japan. By the mid-1950s, Hollywood science fiction films like Them and Tarantula were delivering giant returns at the box office.
You had the giant ants, or as we used to say, the giants from Them. We started off as small ants, and they were exposed to nuclear fallout, and they became these giant ants. Just about any kind of giant monster from that period, you can trace back to nuclear radiation.
Film distributors were rushing to acquire other giant monster movies as quickly as possible.
A small company in Los Angeles purchased the U.S. rights to Godzilla and retitled it Godzilla King of the Monsters.
Godzilla, King of the Monsters, alive, surging up from the depths of the sea on a tidal wave of terror to wreak vengeance on mankind. It's alive, a gigantic beast, raging through the streets on a rampage of total destruction, wiping out a city of 6 million in a holocaust of flame.
One of the things that they did, which is either ingenious or a bastardization, depending on your point of view, is to bring in an American actor, a character actor named Raymond Burr, who later became famous as Perry Mason on TV. And what they did was to excise certain parts of the Japanese version and film new scenes with Raymond Burr playing an American reporter who was waylaid in Tokyo during Godzilla's attack there. What they basically did was disguise this Japanese monster movie as an American monster movie of the type that was so popular in the 1950s.
Dynamic violence, savage action, spectacular thrills.
The American version of Godzilla isn't quite as effective as the Japanese version. Most of the metaphor is missing. Most of the statements against nuclear testing and the H-bomb and atomic bomb testing was dropped from the film.
But enough of the original film's freshness survived to make Godzilla King of the Monsters a king of the box office across America in 1956. The film went on to earn a then mammoth $2 million. But even before Godzilla reached American shores, Toho Studios was already at work on a sequel. Released in Japan in 1955, Godzilla Raids Again paired its title monster with a new sparring partner, a four-legged, spiny-backed brute called Anguillus.
Godzilla Raids Again came to the United States about 4 years after it was released in Japan, and it was changed to Gigantus the Fire Monster in America. And no one seems to know exactly why the name Godzilla was changed to Gigantus for this film.
Here's motion picture adventure and excitement to stagger the imagination. The fantastic fire monsters raging out of the flaming bowels of hell. Mighty Gigantus, the battle of the ages. Scenes and sights and sensations beyond anything the screen has ever shown.
Godzilla's name wasn't the only thing that got lost in translation when the film was dubbed for the U.S. by actors who included a young Japanese-American named George Takei.
In Gigantus, there was one word that we had tremendous difficulty getting the meaning of and finding an English word that fit the lip movement. The Japanese word was bakayaro, which means stupid fool. And finally, the director came up with a word, and we tried it, and it fit. The English word was banana oil.
You're so brave, Tsukioka. Absolutely, darling.
Ah, banana oil. I was desperate and worried and anxious.
The film didn't do very well at all. It was not immediately clear that there was going to be this long-running Godzilla franchise. But yet, Toho was making money off these science fiction pictures. So instead of making Godzilla film after Godzilla film right away, they broadened their horizons and they created creatures like Rodan and Mothra.
Rodan was the story of a prehistoric flying reptile that wakes from hibernation and wings its way into Tokyo. It was also Toho's first giant monster movie filmed in color.
Rodan, which in Japan was called Radon. You know, it's the Japanese pronunciation of radon, Radon. And when that was brought to this country, the title was transmogrified to Rodan. It was the symbol for nuclear devastation.
Supersonic jets cannot catch him. Rockets cannot stop him.
In 1961, the beautiful and mysterious Mothra beguiled audiences with his mystic charm.
What is the secret of Mothra? What is the bizarre spell that awakens Mothra? As these doll-sized girls call to the super god from captivity.
Was a big box office success, and probably because of the appearance of the two twin fairies that enchant Mothra and sing the lovely song that awakens Mothra. The movie was extremely popular with a female audience in Japan.
By the early 1960s, as he faced competition from the latest Japanese monsters, Godzilla had been pushed out of the spotlight, upstaged by a giant moth. And his legions of fans around the world began to wonder if Godzilla was on the brink of extinction. When Animal Icons returns, the king of the monsters meets the king of the jungle for the ultimate in guerrilla warfare. In 1962, Toho Studios decided to wake Godzilla from 7 years in hibernation to face off with a famous furry foe. The result was King Kong versus Godzilla.
But nothing, nobody can stop the great showdown. When King Kong and Godzilla meet to fight for survival of the fittest.
King Kong versus Godzilla was a movie which I guess in some ways was a landmark. You had the first time anyone had seen King Kong in anything new since 1933. You could say it was a way of, sort of cementing relationships between us and Japan after World War II.
Godzilla has a brain about this size. He is sheer brute force. While Kong is a thinking animal. His brain is considerably larger, about 10 times the size of this gorilla's skull. Being instinctive rivals, there is no doubt that they will attempt to destroy one another.
Not a particularly good movie, and King Kong looked pretty bad. But That was their biggest grosser, and they realized you pit Godzilla against some really powerful looking or well-known monster and you got a hit. King Kong was especially well-known in the United States, so that everybody went to see it. Terrible gorilla. Ooh, man.
King Kong vs. Godzilla also marked the first time that the character of Godzilla was given distinctly comic touches.
A.G. Subraya, the special effects director, really had a soft heart for children, and I think in his mind, Godzilla appealed, to children in a great way, and he wanted to soften the character a little bit so that it would be more child-friendly.
The movie's success put fresh fire in the Godzilla franchise. Toho finally realized they had a giant celebrity on their hands, and they moved fast to find other worthy monsters to battle the big green guy. Toho tried to keep audiences in suspense by advertising his next challenger as the mysterious Thing.
What is the Thing? Ooh, was anybody really fooled by that? I think most people probably knew that Godzilla was going to fight Mothra because the trailer gave it away, and if you'd seen the trailer, you would have known. But, more than anything, I think people were going to see Godzilla films at that time. If you were interested in this kind of thing, you would have gone to see it if Godzilla fought, Paul Bunyan.
It looks innocent as a gigantic ape, but its unseen powers are so great that its worshippers beg the Thing's indulgence in self-abasing ceremonies.
By the summer of 1964, the U.S.-Soviet space race was in high gear, and as thoughts of faraway galaxies filled the news, Toho Studios pushed another monster epic into production. This time, they showcased an electrifying new creature from outer space known as King Ghidorah.
Nothing the screen has ever shown before can surpass the thrills of Ghidorah.
Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, also featured Godzilla, Rodan, and Mothra, who overlooked their petty differences of the past to battle the three-headed Golden Goliath for control of the Earth.
By the mid-60s, the Godzilla films were becoming more and more outlandish, and Ghidorah is probably one of the most outlandish creations of all.
A new high in screen terror.
It took something like 12 people to operate this costume, including the guy inside the suit, people to move its heads. There were 3 heads, 2 tails, 2 wings. The wings were gigantic, and if you watch it in a widescreen presentation, the monster sometimes fills almost the entire frame. It's a fantastic creature.
As Godzilla confronted menacing adversaries from other planets, he began to undergo a gradual image makeover, from destroyer of cities into a Japanese folk hero.
I think that Godzilla's changes through the year reflected 2 things: the social climate of the world, and the political climate even, and the market for these films. The market changed to a younger market in Japan.
Toho Studios, in an effort, I think, to win a wider audience, made Godzilla nicer and friendlier, sort of like a stray dog that, the kid down the street can take in. And Godzilla was all of a sudden the guardian of mankind.
Can Godzilla save the Earth from this mastodon of destruction?
International audiences were also amused by the over-the-top characters and less-than-perfect dubbing that became a trademark of the series.
I would say nobody has anything to fear from us. But we are going to control you now.
We did, about 8 or 9 different characters, knowing where to breathe and to get the lip sync in. And you look at the loop, and you see how the lips move. We do that all day long. And then at the very end, they've saved the panic horde sounds that they can just put in wherever, the hordes are running or screaming or absolutely horrified by the attack of this unknown monster. And so you give it your all. It's... Get out of here! Get out of here!
1967's Son of Godzilla turned Godzilla into a proud father. It was more proof that Toho Studios was targeting their series to a very young crowd.
One thing we've always wondered is what happened to Mrs. Godzilla. This egg hatches, a little Godzilla tadpole comes out. The film, you know, follows him through the early stages of his childhood. It's almost like he's going through puberty. He has to teach him how to breathe fire, and of course he can't do it. So, the little child can do no better than just breathe smoke rings, and so Godzilla finally steps on his tail, and a stream of flame finally comes out.
He kind of became campy. That was the decade of campy shows, you know, you had the funny Batman and whatnot, but Godzilla also went that route with him doing kung fu.
By now, Toho wasn't the only Japanese movie studio to use giant monsters to grab younger audiences.
In the late 60s, Godzilla had a major competitor at the box office in the name of Gamera, the Flying Turtle, which was produced by a rival studio called Dai. And those films almost always featured children in the lead roles, and they were very unabashedly made for children.
By 1968, the Big G faced another danger besides box office competition. After 8 Godzilla films, producer Tomoyuki Tanaka was running out of fresh ideas. Partly out of desperation, he made his next film, Destroy All Monsters, an all-out extravaganza that featured no fewer than 11 creature co-stars.
The filmmakers at Toho Studios just threw everything in but the kitchen sink when it came to uniting the creatures. You had the monsters rampaging in Tokyo, Rome, Paris, New York. It was very entertaining seeing these monsters on American soil and also getting together for the ultimate monster rumble.
It's insane. I think that's the time when the makers of Godzilla were dropping LSD. That movie is nuts. These people from outer space are so nuts, and they control the monsters. That was a plot several times, but it's insane.
We do not come from your world. We are here to make you our slaves.
From the laboratories and arsenals of all civilized nations, the most powerful, the newest, the most devastating of weapons blast into action in their effort to destroy all monsters.
When Animal Icons returns, Godzilla gets all choked up over a smog monster. The early 1970s were a time of sit-ins, peace rallies, and environmental activism, a trend reflected in the next monster outing from Japan, 1972's Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster. This time, Japan's best-loved lizard was used to deliver an ecological message about his homeland's serious pollution problems.
Feeding, growing ever more deadly on smog. Nothing man can do can stop the smog monster.
You had something called Yokkaichi asthma in the city of Yokkaichi because the pollution in that city and all over the nation was terrible, and this film kind of addressed that problem.
Other casualties are expected to exceed 30,000. Will Godzilla, man's friend, be vanquished?
It's like a Godzilla film for the youth generation of the early 70s. You had these nightclubs with the liquid blobs being projected on the walls, very groovy, and the girl dancing wearing nothing but what appears to be body paint.
But despite trendy storylines, Godzilla seemed to be a weak imitation of his once dynamic self.
Godzilla ran out of steam in the mid to late 70s, and movie-making styles had changed so much then. There were a lot of zoom shots, and there were kind of crazy plots, and the Japanese were imitating a lot of James Bond ideas where they were secret agents, and people from outer space. It was nutballs.
But if Japanese monsters were slipping at the box office, they remained a beloved fixture on television, thanks to reruns and the Saturday morning cartoon series, The Godzilla Power Hour.
Up from the depths, 30 stories high, breathing fire, his head in the sky, Godzilla, Godzilla.
I grew up in Los Angeles where every Sunday afternoon they would play on the Creature Feature the old Godzilla movies, and I would watch these growing up, and I loved the films.
And for the next 3 decades, Godzilla would be a reliable giant in the world of advertising and commercial marketing, where his image helped sell products around the world.
A lot of things from Japan have reached America's heart.
Holy cow, it's the monster!
Some big and some small. This year, Chevrolet is bringing you 2 of the smaller. New Sprint Turbo imported to go like a bat out of Osaka, and Chevy Spectrum with European styling that's built in Japan. Put yourself in today's Chevrolet and listen to your heartbeat.
That just shows how popular Godzilla was internationally, that, you know, here's this creature from Japan, this uniquely Japanese monster that is so well known around the world that it'd be used to sell, you know, almost anything.
By the mid-1970s, collecting Godzilla was becoming a big business, and since then the size and sophistication of the Japanese monster collectible market has continued to grow.
The U.S. put out a model kit. It was through their Aurora model company, and that was a big success. Japan recognized that, and they started to put out their own little vinyl toys based upon a similar likeness. And since those were so popular, they just decided to hit all the main characters like Baragon and Rodan, Ghidorah.
The rarest toy in my collection would no doubt have to be the bronze Godzilla. That's the goal of every collector, to obtain that figure. And when I got that figure and opened it out of that box, I was just amazed and in love with that toy.
Depends on your budget or how intense you want to go. There are collectors that just live Godzilla, and I imagine their house is just nothing but Godzilla. They probably name their pets after Godzilla monsters.
Toho's been very savvy about connecting with the Godzilla fan base. They've produced a high-end series of toys, computer games, comic books. So they know how to capitalize on the followers of Godzilla.
By the mid-1980s, Godzilla wasn't only living on collectors' shelves. After a decade away from movie theaters, he was ready for another big screen close-up. In 1984, Godzilla's creator, producer Tomoyuki Tanaka, decided to take Godzilla back to basics with a direct sequel to the 1954 classic that started it all. The result, Godzilla 1985, went on to become a financial success across Japan.
This film was distributed in the United States by New World, and they came up with this great idea of bringing Raymond Burr back to reprise the role that he played in the first Godzilla film. What's interesting is that his character in the first film was called Steve Martin, but by this time, Steve Martin, the actor, was really popular and well known, so they were afraid of calling him Steve Martin on camera because they thought people would laugh, so they just called him Mr. Martin.
After the success of Godzilla 1985, Toho handed its revived franchise off to a new generation of movie makers. But after a decade of hit sequels, Godzilla's box office fire was once again fading. And in 1995, Japan's favorite monster met an explosive end in Godzilla vs. Destroya.
Godzilla vs. Destroya, Godzilla actually nukes out at the end and he has a meltdown. It was a pretty exciting film, and you kind of feel sorry for Godzilla at the end when you realize that this might be his last stand.
The poetic thing about all of this is that Tomoyuki Tanaka, who produced the first Godzilla film, shepherded Godzilla throughout his entire career and actually produced Godzilla vs. Destroya, and Tanaka actually died 2 years later. He followed the monster throughout its entire career up to that point.
When Animal Icons returns, Japan's most famous monster goes Hollywood. By 1998, the computer-generated dinosaurs of Jurassic Park and other state-of-the-art movie monsters were taking the biggest bites out of the box office. In the wake of their success, filmmakers Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin, the team behind the sci-fi blockbuster Independence Day, set out to reinvent Godzilla for a new generation.
Said, we can't do it straight. Then all of a sudden we realized, yeah, if they let us like change Godzilla enough, if they kind of let us do our movie, if we can change even the image of Godzilla, we would be interested.
But what happened is about 95% of the film is digitally animated, and a sleeker, faster, meaner, more agile, wilder Godzilla than you've ever seen before.
Emmerich and Devlin cast Broadway and film star Matthew Broderick as a biologist in hot pursuit of the marauding monster. He was joined by Maria Patillo as a novice TV news reporter and Hank Azaria as an over-caffeinated cameraman.
Well, I've always been a fan of Godzilla, you know, so I just got a call that said, you know, the people who did Independence Day are doing Godzilla and want you to star in it, and I was like, are they sure? Yeah, and I'll be right there. I'm on duty.
44 years after he first emerged from Tokyo Bay, Godzilla was ready to sink his teeth into a new city.
It also just was interesting to see New York transformed and lit, you know, blocks and blocks of it, and soldiers and tanks going down Fifth Avenue.
You have to pretend with a capital P. It's a little odd. That was early in shooting. By then I was still okay. It was after like 3 months of pretending a big giant lizard was after you that you start realizing this, you know, technically is a form of insanity, believing a big lizard is after you.
Emmerich and Devlin's revamped Godzilla was launched with one of the most lavish and extensive publicity campaigns of the 1990s.
To see an American company take on Godzilla with a big budget, that was just really exciting. And I remember seeing the trailers, and all that was handled awesomely.
Godzilla opened in 3,310 theaters on Memorial Day weekend 1998. The movie stomped, pummeled, and crushed its competition at the box office, earning a record $74 million in 3 days. It went on to gross over $300 million worldwide. But reviews were mixed, and hardcore Godzilla fans mostly breathed fire over their hero's Hollywood makeover.
I despised the American Godzilla remake. I thought that it was a totally wrong approach. It was too serious. It was too derivative of other big-budget American science fiction and fantasy films. He was just another misunderstood creature.
If they called it something else like Giant Iguana or whatever, I mean, I would have loved it. But having the title Godzilla, you expect, you know, this I don't know, mutated, you know, dinosaur type thing coming out at you with fire and destroying cities and whatnot. This Godzilla, he was running from the airplanes and hiding in the buildings.
For die-hard fans, Godzilla would always be a guy in a green lizard suit. And to their delight, that tradition continued in Japanese-produced hits like Godzilla 2000 and All Monsters Attack in 2001.
He's kind of gone back to the roots of becoming more of a destructive force. All Monsters Attack. He was incarnation of dead spirits of all the Japanese that died during World War II, and their spirits just taking out their aggressions on Japan, because supposedly Japan has forgotten their sacrifices during World War II.
Perhaps the ultimate experience for any Japanese monster fan is G-Fest, an annual gathering in the U.S. that attracts up to 1,000 admirers.
My first movie, I think, was Godzilla vs. King Kong, and I think I was the only kid in the class rooting for Godzilla.
I showed him his first film, and he's been hooked ever since.
A guy named J.D. Lees was able to gather common Godzilla fans from around the country, and from there, G-Fest was born. They'll have all kinds of Godzilla collectibles for sale for the fans, like from movies, posters, toys, you name it. There's also little events, like sometimes the director will show up from Japan. The little kids, they have costume contests.
And here he is!
In 2004, Godzilla also got his due from one of Hollywood's most respected film societies. The American Cinematheque celebrated his 50th anniversary at the historic Egyptian Theater.
We expect a wide range of people because Godzilla is just a well-known film character throughout the whole world.
Fans were lined up around the block. We had several of Godzilla's creators special effects guys from the golden age. There was memorabilia, actual production artwork from those films that was put on display. It was really a great time for fans and creators of the films to actually come together.
He just appeals to something in everyone. Some people, they think he's cute. The guys, they think he's just cool. Be able to unleash your energy and, you know, destroy buildings. I mean, that's kind of a fantasy, I guess, for a lot of people. They're primarily guys, but I have met a few girls that think Godzilla's cute. And so, yeah, there's definitely girl fans out there.
Since I was born, I grew with Godzilla and Gamera and Mothra. Godzilla has emotion. Especially in 1984, I cried it. I cried in the theater, and I got videotape, and every time I see that one, I cry.
When Animal Icons returns, the monsters of Japan get ready for their biggest battle ever. In 2004, Toho Studios announced it was retiring the character of Godzilla and that its upcoming movie, Godzilla Final Wars, would be his last film. But fans around the world had heard those kinds of warnings before.
I don't really think Godzilla's going to go away for long. He's a very profitable franchise, and there's really no reason for Toho not to make Godzilla movies. In fact, there's many reasons, many green reasons for them to make lots and lots of Godzilla movies. So my suspicion is that after a short hibernation, we'll be seeing him again in a few years.
Godzilla, Godzilla.
More than 50 years after Godzilla first terrified audiences, toppled buildings, and threw Tokyo into turmoil, audiences still can't resist this rubber-suited wonder. And his creature co-stars, whose personalities are as big as their fanatic following. Whether serving as a symbol for the real-life horrors of atomic warfare, or camping it up for preteen movie fans, Japanese movie monsters remain a towering force in pop culture around the world.
Godzilla is the series they always come back to, and the ones that generations of fans have grown to know and love.
Godzilla actually has some sort of emotion, you know? He gets sad, he gets quizzical, he gets mad. So I think it's that appeals to us, and it's also the wonderful sight of seeing two grown men in rubber suits throwing fire at each other and destroying buildings. I mean, there's nothing better than that.
Absolutely fascinating that people would become so swept up by something that grew out of Japan's fear of nuclear radiation. It's a phenomenon.
Welcome to the amazing